Any musical system is composed of a series of pitches which can be identified with numbers, with letters such as A, B, C, D, or with names such as Latin, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, or Hindi, Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, and so on. In all cases, these are conventional denominations. There is no limit as to their numbers. A system may be composed of any of them, although there seems to be a preference for odd numbers. This is probably because they cannot be divided into two separate integers evenly, and if they were, it would leave a remainder. This is very significant, as we shall see during the course of these lectures. The West has borrowed the heptatonic system from Eastern scholarship through various circumvoluted paths. However, there are no logical reasons for having chosen this system. Some claim that the reason is because the octave ratio of 2/1 is the simplest and therefore the most perfect. But this would only be logical insofar as a first degree were compared to an eighth degree, having that ratio between them. However, should each of the degrees be compared to their preceding one, such as the ratio of D to C, the ratio of E to D, or the ratio of G to C, or whatever, then the premise would be illusionary. For sure, we find the octaval relationship a pleasing one. But is the octave really an interval? And would it not simply be the same as the tonic pitch, with stronger harmonics at its treble? It is also noteworthy that the parallel organum, developed in the 9th century of the Common Era, as we know it from the Musica Incuriadis, used the vox principales and the vox organales a fifth apart, and not at the octave. The matter of ancient Greek musicology is not apprehended in these lectures because all we know comes from very late medieval and Renaissance copies of originals which have vanished a long time ago for obscure reasons. The oldest known music manuscript was written in the 11th century of the Common Era. However, some passionate musicologists claim that they are accurate copies of the originals, although being distant from the originals by over 1,000 years. However, should one question the authenticity of the Gospels of Christianity, having a profusion of over 50,000 patristic manuscripts, then the limited music documents of ancient Greece, dating from a much older period and of a far lesser quantity, would, on grounds of statistics only, remain reasonably questionable. The first lecture is about UET 7126. The second lecture is about CBS 10996. The third lecture is about UET 774. The fourth lecture is about N4782. The fifth lecture is about KAR 158. The sixth lecture is about N3354. The seventh lecture is about BM 65217 plus 66616. The eighth lecture is about MS 5105. The ninth lecture is about CBS 1766. The 10th lecture is about YBC 11381. The 11th lecture is about metrology and quantification. The 12th lecture is about hurrian text H6. Professor Oliver Gurney produced a hand copy of UET 7126, which was published in the excavation texts, publications of the Joint Expedition of the British Museum and of the University Museum of the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia to Mesopotamia, Volume 7, Middle Babylonian Legal Documents and Other Texts, Plate 126. Leonard Woolley found the tablet at the ancient city of at the Dublama, south of the main courtyard. It was given the field number U3011. It is a Neo-Babylonian fragmentary copy of the 32nd tablet of the series Nobnitu Sumerian Sigolam, one of the great Babylonian bilingual lexical texts. Although the present tablet was written around 600 BCE, the knowledge it encapsulates is certainly much older, as it describes the stringing of a boviform lyre that was representative of the late 4th, early 3rd millennium BCE, and which was fitted with 9 strings. Although most copies of this lexical series are relatively late and date from around the 1st millennium BCE, there is an old Babylonian precursor known as Proto-Nohubnitu published in UET 6, 358. There are also Middle Babylonian versions dated around 1000 BCE, including a damaged copy. In the late 4th millennium, a scribe was facing the side of a boviform lyre showing the bridge, the strings and the yoke, which was more or less horizontal. But it was the highest part of the instrument, and it is where the strings were attached and tuned by means of pegs. The lyricist gave the scribe descriptive names for each of the strings, which also represented the pitch to which they were tuned. Thus, the series of strings was imprinted in the scribe's cognition as a linear representation of the system. However, he had to write down on his clay tablet what he had just been taught. But this time, the horizontal linear series of strings or pitches translated into a vertical order with the highest pitch at the top of his list. And so, as a consequence, the notion of pitch height became associated with altitude, the highest pitch toward the heavens and the lowest toward the underworld. The first string had the highest pitch, and all others were sequentially tuned to lower pitches. Then the scribe was informed that the 5th string was at equal distance from the treble and from the bass. This description was further embellished with other details for other strings. As a consequence, a cognitive map was created in the collective unconscious and generated a unified representation of the spatial environment to support memory and guide for future systemic developments. A similar process came with the Assyrian map of the world from the 9th century BCE, later borrowed by Isidore of Seville and his Orbis Terrarum, the O and T map, in the 7th century CE. Having described the general signification outlines, we shall now analyze the description given in this text. 1. It is to be noted that the Akkadian is partly, but not entirely, a translation of the Sumerian. 2. The Sumerian entries are descriptive, for they give the names and locations for each of the 9 strings. 3. We have to assume that the names of the strings are also the names of the pitches when they are tuned to the system described. 4. There appears to be a tonal interrelationship between the first and the last lines with line 5, which would be an axis of symmetry. 5. Thus, lines 9 to 5 seem to stand in symmetry with lines 5 to 1. 6. We take Akkadian kud mu'um in line 1 as the adjective kudmu, following the explicit writing kud mu'u in CBS 10996 meaning 4 rather than the noun kudmu meaning front. 7. Similarly, we take shamushu to stand for the adjective shamushu meaning adjacent, understanding Sumerian sa'ush as sa'uz, the underlying Akkadian verb being imedu. Shamushu is reconstructed as sa'ush into sawush with W as a glide. The W is written with phonograms containing M from the Old Babylonian period onward. 8. We take uhru in line 9 as the adjective uhru rather than the noun uhru to mean rear in lines 6 to 8. Theo Crispine translated the Sumerian lines 6, 7 and 8 as sa, x, a, ga, gu, and string 9 as sa, 1, a, ga, gu, la by string x of the bigger back and first string of the bigger back. The 4 last string names have agagula, the bigger back of the lyre, which names the strings at the back of the instrument by opposition to the first string, which would be placed closest to the head of typical boviform lyres. Thus, strings 4, 3, 2, and 1 of the lyre would be placed at its bigger back, since the only known instrument having a bigger back or bottom is the monumental boviform lyre or other lyres with other animals such as calves and deer. It makes little doubt that the Samu instrument was the monumental boviform lyre known from the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE and probably earlier. This suggests that this instrument remained a paradigm during the next millennium until it faded away in the late 1st millennium BCE and later in other cultures. This text was not only a list of strings with which the instrument was strung, but it also implied the status for a fundamental transformational generative enitonic system, which was realized with UET 774. The current view shows a table on which figure different interpretations of the nomenclature in this text. Some are in relation to another text that we shall see later, and others depend on the interpretations from different Assyriologists. Then, the viewer may ask why the first two strings in Sumerian and Akkadian are not simply called string 1 and string 2 of the front, since their symmetrical opposite is called second and first of the back. What is the meaning of the third string with small, thin, and the fourth with Ea the Creator, and why the first line has Sadi without 1, while the fifth line has Sadi with the number 5? What is the meaning of Sadi? These writings cannot encapsulate some extraordinary or unintelligible system. However, they can be explained musicologically. As we will see, the third thin string has an important systemic function in relation to the fourth string, created by the god Ea, giving a clear indication about the transition from pentatonic anhemitonism to diatonic hemitonism. The third thin string has a parallel with the akakoba, also meaning thin string, which is found on a harp from Uganda, with a similar function and position as we have it in the present text, and with a Chinese peen, Latin quilisma, and stropha. In early Oriental Christian music, the term quilisma was used to define the weak degree, the Chinese pena, and the stropha, the strong degree, the one above the semitone. In the Babylonian seminal model, the peen or stropha was the F, the strong degree, at the treble, and the natural B, the quilisma, the weak degree at the bass. Thus, the Babylonian quilisma would be the natural F and the stropha the natural B. As we shall see later, this is exactly the description of the diatonic generative scale of a G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G. We will agree that the tonal center described in this text was a relative D for the reason that all pitches issuing from this axis to the treble and to the bass are symmetrical. This text describes the relative position of pitches with systemic tuning intervals of the fifth and of the fourth. This constitutes a generative system from which flow named and positioned intervals as we know them in other texts. The initial construction was undertaken independently with both symmetric fifth, D towards A, the treble fifth, and D towards G, the bass fifth. From D, two fifths were projected, one at the treble A and one at the bass G. From A and G, two fourths were projected inwardly to an E for the treble and to a C for the bass. Then from the axis D, two fourths are projected outwardly, G at the treble and A for the bass. This generates an anhemitonic scale of either ascending G, A, C, D, E, G, A, or descending A, G, E, D, C, A, G, but where the treble A, G, E, D is in perfect symmetry with the bass G, A, C, D. This system is made up of intervals of the just tone as a consequence of the tuning by fifths and fourths. However, it creates a triametonic void between G and E at the treble and A and C at the bass, or a pentatonic scale spanning an Enea chord A, G, E, D, C, A, G. This anhemitonic system avoided the inclusion of the yet inconceivable semitone, as it would have amounted to a dissonance in the same manner. The third was dissonant during the Western Dark Ages, and the quarter tone to some Western ears. The semitone slowly became an imperative for the diatonic structure in both treble and bass parts of the anhemitonic system as music systems evolved, although it is certain that both anhemitonic and diatonic system shared the musical sphere for millennia and still share the same sphere to this day. These voids would be filled, probably during the middle of the third millennium. The method consisted in a crossover of the treble and bass fifths from E to B, and from C to F. Pitches B and F constituted the pene, with natural F being the quilisma and natural B, the strophica as we would know them from the earliest occurrence of the Christian Oriental chant, which found its sources very early in the development of musicology and survives to this day with the practice of Jewish, Christian, and Islamic cantillations, intonation, and recitations. In early Christian chant, the Akkadian third thin string, known as Latin quilisma, and its counterpart, the stropha, would be noted with a sign composed of lozenges, or jagged lines, which represented semitonal uncertainty, as we see it in examples extracted from him. Imense celi condita, with top left, the quilisma between punctum and podatus, and top right, the strophicus. Below are extracts from the sorsum corda and obimus ad dominum. This system generates what has been defined by Dominican monk John Clare as the mother notes in his researches on early Christian plain chant. These are the three central pitches, descending E, D, C, or ascending C, D, E, the generative third or ditone, which is Akkadian Sholshotum, probably known from the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE up to the 1st century CE, and in practice to this day in ethnic, folk, classical, jazz, religious, and other rock musics. The next step in our work on this fundamental text is about the quantification of the pitch values that are indirectly indicated in the text. Therefore, I will inflict upon you a quick reminder about the musical ratio system. Interval ratios are ratios of frequencies of the pitches in a musical interval. For example, I shall hypothesize that the ratio from the 1st string to the 5th string and of the 5th string to the 1st string of the rear are just fifths, that is descending, A to D and D to G. Perfect fifths have the ratio of 3 to 2, that is 1.5. Thus, if 3/2 is the ratio of frequency of the fifth, then 2/3 is the ratio of string length. Thus, ratios of frequency are reciprocals of ratios of string lengths. However, it must be reminded that these ratios only apply to the just intonation system, and not to the equal temperament, which is irrelevant to the music in antiquity. Firstly, the perfect fifth, ratio of 3/2 equals 1.5, means that the higher pitch of that frequency is 1.5 times that of the lower pitch. Secondly, the perfect fourth, ratio of 4/3 equals 1.3333, means that the higher pitch is 1.333 times that of the lower pitch. Thirdly, the major third, ratio of 5/4 equals 1.25, means that the higher pitch is 1.25 times that of the lower pitch. Fourthly, the minor third, ratio of 6/5 equals 1.2, means that the higher frequency is 1.2 times that of the lower pitch. It is significant to note that the Babylonians gave numbers to their gods. Anu, the highest god, had number 60, followed by Enlil with 50, followed by Ea with 40, and followed by Sin with 30, in the following base 60 order: 60, 50, 40, and 30, or 6, 5, 4, 3, which are the principal integers, fulfilling the fundamental Babylonian ratio system. 6/4 equals 3/2, the perfect fifth, 4/3, the perfect fourth, 6/5, the minor third, 5/4, the major third, 3/2 minus 4/3 equals the just tone of 9/8, and so on. The decimalization of these figures would have allowed for more refining in the musical system, allowing for microtonality. Now, in order to offer a more easily understandable system, musical cents can be calculated from ratios. The cent is a logarithmic unit of measure used for musical intervals. In order to convert ratios of frequency, multiply the constant 3986.314 with the logarithm to base 10 of the quotient of the division of the highest figure of the ratio by its lowest number. However, it is more convenient to use online calculators or use tables in Helmholtz's on the sensation of tone. In the quantification of pitches in UET 7126, we shall use both ratios of frequencies and musical sense. We start with the tonal axis D, from which we project 2/5 A and G, and then 2/4 from A and G. and 2 more fourths from D. Then 2 cross over fourths from E and C. The outcome is a complete diatonic enneatonic system. This view shows the intervallic quantifications of the system. This produces the following descending scale from A to G. A equals 0 cents, G equals 204 cents, F equals 408 cents, E equals 498 cents, D equals 702 cents, C equals 906 cents, B equals 996 cents, A equals 1200 cents, and G equals 1404 cents. The sequence of these 9 descending pitches are very close to our modern Western temperament system, but it hosts the same pitches of most of our musical traditions up to the refinements of the 18th century in the Western modern world, and most of us would naturally sing these pitches. Only modern instruments, such as the piano, are tuned in the equal temperament, but the violin tunes its 4 strings on the just intonation, the same as the Babylonian model. The present copy of this text, UET 7126, may come from the middle of the 1st millennium BCE. However, the cognitive processes it holds into the deep furrows of its lines comes from a far older instrument, the boviform lyre, which was the commonest instrument from the end of the 4th to the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. Then the lyre lost its predominance, probably as it was an instrument requiring much expertise for its making, several costly materials, and that it was difficult to tune. As a consequence, the monumental zoomorphic lyres became smaller with less ornamentation, with fewer strings, and mainly used strumming rather than for the playing of melodies. The paradigmatic lyre and the theory it constructed through millennia is certainly the most important legacy to the music of the ancient world from the end of the 4th millennium. Its development followed the evolution of the cuneiform writing system. Firstly, this text explained the structure of the anhemitonic pre-pentatonic scale and its development into an enneatonic diatonic system with a generative scale, which was called pitum, meaning appropriately opening. The nature of the description has allowed for the quantification of its pitches. The unclear Lazaku interval, that was known as koblitu, meaning middle, as it stands right in the middle of the system, and which is a diminished fifth measuring 588 cents, unlike the tritone of 612 cents. Furthermore, it hosts the 7 intervals of thirds, which are the basis of this remarkable system. This text is generative as it expands to the treble and to the bass, in symmetry to create hen-decatonic, tridecatonic, pentadecatonic hypersystems, in order to contain all systemic possibilities from the late 4th millennium to the eve of Christianity. This tablet, which was first published in 1960, created the main and most important division between the views held by one Assyriologist and their followers with no knowledge of musicology against the views of a few other musicologists with some knowledge of Assyriology. However, it was the dogmatic ideology of the Assyriologists which, regardless of the improbability of their hypothesis, won over the rational proposition of competent musicologists, as they were believed only on the basis of their reputation as Assyriologists. The contention between the parties is that while the Assyriologists ruled assertively that the intervals of 2 pitches listed in this tablet were, indubitably and exclusively, played simultaneously, that is, together as chords or dyads as they called them, my hypothesis was that while agreeing that these paired numbers would have been played simultaneously, there would be no reason for them, additionally, but not exclusively, not to be played consecutively, that is, one pitch after the other, and even melodically, that is, played with all the diatonic pitches included in any interval. When, in one of many articles that I proposed, I asked what law would have forbidden the consecutive and melodic playing of these intervals. The answer was at all times that my articles were rejected on the advice of the Assyriologist, who promoted the simultaneous playing of these intervals. The current clip shows the hand copy of the left column of text CBS 10996. This text is Neo-Babylonian and comes from the middle of the first millennium BCE. We note that 9 lines have broken off at the top of the tablet and at the bottom, with parts of lines 24 to 28 missing. The text is clearly divided into 2 parts, the top part from lines 1 to 14 and the second from lines 15 to 28. The first part from lines 1 to 14 begins with 2 integers written one after the other. The paired numbers are followed by the Sumerian sign Sa, which we take as meaning string and interval. Follows expressions. Lines 1 to 14 have been reconstructed from the structure of lines 10 to 14 and with the descriptions in lines 15 to 28. The first part is resumed as follows. Line 1, 1, 5, interval, nish tuhri. Line 2, 7, 5, interval, shairu. Line 3, 2, 6, interval, ishatu. Line 4, 1, 6, interval, sholshatu. Line 5, 3, 7, interval, imbubu. Line 6, 2, 7, interval, 4, u, to be read as rebutu. Line 7, 4, 1, interval, Sumerian shub morub, to be read as Akkadian need kabli. Line 8, 1, 3, interval, Sumerian G shubba, to be read as Akkadian ishku. Line 9, 5, 2, interval, Sumerian morub 2, to be read as Akkadian kabli 2. Line 10, 2, 4, interval, Titor morub 2, to be read as Tito kabli 2. Line 11, 6, 3, interval, kitmu. Line 12, 3, 5, interval, Tito ishatu. Line 13, 7, 4, interval, P2. Line 14, 4, 6, interval, Zerdu. Lines 15 to 28 complement the information given in the first 14 lines. Firstly, the strings of the intervals are given in words. Secondly, they are given in numbers, as they were in the first 14 lines. And thirdly, the names of the intervals follow with the same orthography known from the first 14 lines. From this, we can conclude that this text was probably a teaching manual for the benefit of music students, but probably not for musicians who would already have been aware of the names and positions for these intervals. Thus, this text enumerates and nomenclates 14 intervals of paired integers. The numbers used for this enumeration are from 1 to 7. We would agree that this represented a heptatonic ambatus which hosted 14 intervals. However, as it stands, and in the absence of any comparison to or with other texts, there is no evidence in this text that these intervals would respond to a diatonic heptatonic system, no more than it was ascending, and even less probably that number 1 was a C, 2, a D, 3, a C, etc. However, our dogmatic Assyriologist ruled, without any evidence that this text represented an ascending diatonic heptatonic system, and that this system was practiced during all periods in the ancient Near and Middle East. Furthermore, without any further evidence, our Assyriologist went on ruling that the paired pitches in this text were to be played simultaneously, to the exclusion of any other consecutiveness or melodicality. However, later texts proved that indeed the text addressed to an heptatonic system where C was represented with number 1, but it could not be proven, and it cannot to this day, that the system was ascending or descending, although a text from the 18th century BCE proves that during the early 2nd millennium BC, at least, the system was descending. However, this does not prove that it was descending during the 1st millennium BCE. Nevertheless, melodic systems in the Near Orient have a tendency to be descending, and it is on this basis that we shall consider that this text represented a descending system. While it is certain, after comprehensive studies of other texts, notably CBS 1766, that CBS 10996 represented 14 intervals located within a heptatonic system. However, it remains that the order in which these intervals are placed is irregular, as you can appreciate on the present graphic. I have played these intervals consecutively, for this is what I believe was the original intention. This broken intervallic sequence is the consequence of the heptatonic span, which needed to inverse some of the intervals so that they fitted within the heptachord. Should the pitches be allowed to follow a natural sequence of 13 degrees, or a tridecachord, the intervals would be flowing in a regular pattern. This is the evidence that prior to heptatonism, a tridecatonic system would have been in usage, probably in the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. We shall now listen to both the heptatonic and the tridecatonic versions superimposed. Since some of the intervals are inverted in the heptatonic version, this will not change anything to the consonants of the intervals. The difference is in the quality of the intervals. With the tridecatonic version we have only fifths and thirds, while with the heptatonic version we find fifths, thirds, fourths and sixths. The importance of the inversion of intervals is critical only when they are taken melodically. For example, for the composition of a melody, such as with the hurrian songs, or with scale structure, such as with text UET 774. For instance, the fifth 1-5 is F, E, D, C, B. When it is inverted, it becomes a fourth, B, A, C, F. An inverted sixth with 6 pitches become a third with 3 pitches. Therefore, a melody composed for a pentasyllabic word must be a fifth and cannot be the inverted fourth, obviously. This is why the hurrian songs cannot be interpreted with the inverted intervals in CBS 01996, dating from the 1st millennium BCE, because these songs were written in the middle of the 2nd millennium with a notation system where intervals were not inverted, but consisted in descending fifths and ascending fourths. Amazingly, most who have attempted at deciphering the hurrian song H6 did so anachronistically, using heptatonism, while that song was written for a tridecatonic system. Now we shall listen to the melodic intervals as they are suggested in the original text CBS 10996 and straight after, as they would have been in the tridecatonic precursor. The second version is melodious, and at the end it would naturally continue the sequence, 1 octave lower, unlike with the first version, which ends with no logical continuation. And now, the second version. It is significant that additionally to the numbers which locate the intervals on a grid, whether of 8 or 13 numbers, intervals had names ascribed to them. Their purpose would have to distinguish their content, not unlike the ajnas of the makam, which precisely does so. Semitones are placed differently with each descending fifth, with one exception. Thirds also share this characteristic. However, it is possible that Babylonian musicology had two different semitones, as I shall explain later in this lecture. Firstly, the so-called Pythagorean lemma of 90 cents, ratio 256/243, and the just semitone with 112 cents, ratio of 16/15. This would further confirm that the intervals of the tridecatonic system could have, additionally to simultaneous and consecutive, been more significantly taken as melodic intervals. A question remains only partially answered. Why did they choose ascending thirds and descending fifths? A modest reason would be that the third was the fundamental trilateral musical cell, and two of them conjoined amounting to a fifth. Additionally, Near Eastern semiotics show that systems and melodies arising from them are constituted from chains of thirds. We shall conclude this lecture with this graphic representation of the generative symmetric tridecatonic intervallic system in both rising and falling polarities, a system which was derived from the reconstruction of text CBS 10996. This tablet, known under its field number, U780, dates from the Old Babylonian period, about 1800 BCE. It was unearthed by Leonard Woolley et al. In the late 1920s and was published some 40 years later, in 1968, by Professor Gurney, who published it again in 1974 as a line drawing for the 7th volume of the excavation texts, where it became known as UET 774. It was hosted at the British Museum until the 1970s, when it was returned to the Iraq Museum in Baghdad. The content of this prescriptive text is of an amazing systemicality in the field of musicology, as it holds the indubitable proof that 4,000 years ago, Babylonians had formulated a generative system producing 8 scales. These were the basis for the 8 Gregorian modes, which only appeared in the late 8th century CE, that is about 2600 years later, and for which there was no precedent in ancient Greek theory. Thus, we can find a continuity from the Old Babylonian period to the Levantine tradition, and to the early Church of the East, which flowed to western shores in the 8th century CE, probably transmitted by the early Byzantine octokos. This fragmentary flake measures 10 by 8.9 centimeters. We shall firstly analyze the contents of the right column. Essentially, this translates as, if the lyre is tuned in the scale of Pitum, the interval embubum is unclear, tune up string 3 of the front, embubum will be clear. If the lyre is tuned in the scale of embubum, the interval kitmum is unclear, tune up string 4 of the rear, kitmum will be clear. If the lyre is tuned in the scale of kitmum, the interval ishotum is unclear, tune up strings 2 of the front and 1 of the rear, ishotum will be clear, tune down. If the lyre is tuned in the scale of ishotum, the interval coblitum is unclear, tune down strings 2 of the front and 1 of the rear, the lyre is tuned in the scale of kitmum. If the lyre is tuned in the scale of kitmum, the interval ishotum is unclear, tune down string 4 of the rear, the lyre will be tuned in the scale of embubum. A first observation is that the text is divided into 2 sections at line 12 with the prescriptive locution Nusuhrum, Sumerian ZZ or Nasarum, Sumerian Gid-E. It is a technical term which orders to tighten, in this case, to tighten strings. The amount of tension is not given, but as we shall see later, it would have been of a just, or of a so-called Pythagorean semitone. The Akkadian antonym is Ne-Um, Sumerian Tulu. A second observation is that the text which has survived is further divided into quatrains, which above line 12 give instructions to tighten strings and below line 12 to slacken strings. Although this text is damaged, it was possible to reconstruct its missing lines by means of extrapolation. It is to be noted that the cleared interval name of the last line of a quatrain gives its name to the scale that follows in the next quatrain. It is further observed that line 12 acts as an axis of symmetry between the tightening and the slackening quatrains of this text. This extrapolation was made possible because of our knowledge of the names of 14 intervals listed in text CBS 10996. However, the versatility of the present text, although distant from CBS 10996 by over 1,000 years, makes it that a heptatonic set of scales could have been generated from it, although, and as we shall see later, it had been conceptualized for an enitonic system, which would have been preceded during the 3rd millennium by its original application for an hendicatonic system. We shall now analyze the formulation of the quatrains of the first part and of the second part. For that purpose, we shall use the first scale of the system in its reconstruction. The scale is E shortum. It is the falling scale of C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, and B. When the lyre is tuned to the scale of E shortum, the interval coblitum, which is placed between string 5 and string 1 of the rear, is unclear. Tune up string 5. As a consequence, coblitum will be clear. This operation changes the scale of E shortum into the scale of coblitum. We shall now go through the whole process of the first part of the enitonic scale formation as prescribed with text UET 774. The second part, being in symmetry to the first part, tunes down what had been tuned up in the first part until it reaches the first scale, and as such does not require any further explanation. We note that the scale generation, as prescribed in our text, includes some inverted unclear intervals. For example, in the scale of Need Koblim, the unclear interval Pitum is an augmented fourth, and in the scale of Mbubum, the unclear interval Kitmum is also an augmented fourth. Of course, an augmented fourth and a diminished fifth sound the same. However, This suggests that the present text was insufficient to hold unclear diminished fifths, which would have needed a hendicatonic system to include only structural fifths and diminished fifths for the generation of the 8-scale system. It is therefore proposed that a precursory hendicatonic system was in usage before the present text, probably during the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. Follows hendicatonic, anytonic, and heptatonic scale sets to illustrate these inversions. You can pause this video at any time to examine these scales. We note that the intervals used during the tuning process are just fifths, diminished fifths, or augmented fourths. Whenever the span of the system is reduced to the heptachord or to the anychord, some of the just fifths or diminished fifths need to be inversed as just fourths or augmented fourths, while with the hendicachord there are only just fifths and one diminished fifth. Additionally, this remarkable text shows a significant revolution in the conceptualization of scale systems, which I would place at the turn of the 3rd and 2nd millennia, where dynamical systems became thetical, or at least where the thetical added to the dynamical system. Now, what are dynamical and thetical systems? Dynamical comes from the Greek dunamikos, from dunamis meaning power, and from dunasthe meaning to be able. Thetical also comes from the Greek thetikos, meaning laid down, from tithane to place. However, these definitions do not help much understanding the principle. The earliest forms of music in the ancient Near East would have been sung from a large series of pitches which suited the different voices of a society. There is evidence drawn from the interpretation of texts and their analysis that this ambitus would have become, at an unknown time of its evolution, pentadecachordal, or based on a series of 15 pitches, initially of unknown values, which much later became diatonic. However, when this large ambitus was transposed to instruments, it also required a large number of strings, hence the iconography showing monumental lyres with many strings to suit the different scales of their systems during the early 3rd millennium BCE. However, it is doubtful that a single lyre would have been fitted with 15 strings, but rather some would have accommodated part of the ambitus and other parts. This would have caused problems of tonal synchronization should several lyres played together, as the pitches on one lyre might be different from the pitches in another. Initially, a large ambitus would have responded to the various vocal spans of a society, with the voices of men, women, and children amounting to around 2 octaves. It is only when anhemitonism and diatonism appeared that organically the concept of mode developed, possibly with the pentadecachord, which hosted thirds and fifths having their own modal characteristics, and which conjoined into 7 original anytonic modes, namely Isha-tum, Nish-turim, P-tum, Keet-mum, Kabli-tum, Need-kablim, and Mbubum. A series of diatonic pitches of around 2 octaves amounts to a dynamic hypersystem. Babylonians chose the scale of Isha-tum as the fundamental scale, as we did in the West millennia later. Now, the thetical system consists in the transposition of all other modes onto the fundamental scale. Therefore, Kabli-tum transposed onto the scale of C has an F sharp, Nish-turiem transposed onto the scale of C has an F sharp and a C sharp, as illustrated for both the first and the second parts of our text. Note that because of transposition, the last scale of Isha-tum in the first part is 1 semitone higher than Isha-tum, which started the sequence. Thus, the thetical system in text UET 774 would have been a considerable musical innovation, which allowed musicians to play in all modes, with just 9 or 11 strings, compared to the dynamical system, which would have required more strings. However, this revolution or reformation might not have been as practical as it seems, as the retuning of a lyre during a performance would certainly have taken some time, while a dynamical instrument would not require any tuning. However, it is also possible that performances for specific events were all composed in the same key and did not need any retuning. Another problem came from the impossibility of having instruments thetically and dynamically tuned. Playing together for their modes would not be in the same keys, and that in addition there is no evidence of a standard pitch to which instruments were tuned. This considerably restricts the hypothesis of string orchestras. There were 5 lyres found in the graves at Ur. All differed in size and in string plan, which indicated that they were tuned to different pitches. To conclude our lecture about the right column of this text, we would add that its prescriptions confirm our previous assumptions that these sets were constructed from thirds conjoining into fifths, which in turn conjoined into n near tonic scales. In the left column of UET 774, lines 1, 6 and 11 must refer to 3 rear strings since uhu is in the genitive, and that only in these 3 uhu strings can be in the construct state. Ribi uhrim, shal shi uhrim or sini uhrim meaning 4th string of the rear, 3rd string of the rear, 2nd string of the rear. At line 6, we take uhrum as the adjective uhu, rather than the noun uhu, meaning rear. The other terms refer to interval names known from CBS 10996. Line 2 has the nominative and could be either Ishar-tum, Shol-shar-tum, Rebu-tum or Kobli-tum, with intervals 26, 86, 97 and 59 respectively. Line 3 ending with butum could only belong to re butum 9-7. Line 4, Kobli team in the genitive implies that it is preceded by titor, meaning bridge. The intervals could either be 4-8 or 11-9. In line 5, Ishar team could be preceded by titor since it is in the genitive, interval 12-10. Line 7 has Ishar tum in the nominative, interval 2-6. Line 8 ending with the genitive could either be titor kabli team or titor ishar team 11-9 or 12-10. The next line, 9 with deem, could either be 1-5, 4-8 or 11-9. Line 10 with its nominative ending is most likely to be 6-9. Leaving aside the philological debate raised by the above reconstruction and relying only on musicological logic, we note that the text is made up of quatrains, as is the case with the right column of the same tablet. However, on this column, quatrains are subtitled with pitch string names arranged in descending fifths. The quatrain proceed as follows. The first line is a descending step melodic fifth. The second line is an ascending step melodic third. The third line is an ascending step melodic third. The fourth line is a descending step melodic fifth. The fifth line is the name or pitch of a string. These intervals follow a specific pattern: 1-5, 7-5, 12-10, 5-9. They represent intervals which are written in full, as they are listed with CBS 10996. 1-5 with niche tuhrim, 7-5 with shayrum, 12-10 with titor ishar team, 5-9 with kabli tum. Follows the subtitle, in this case, Homshu perhaps. The next quatrain starts with the last interval ending the previous one. In this case, 5-9, interval kabli tum. These intervals follow a specific pattern: 1-5, 7-5, 12-10, 5-9. They represent intervals which are written in full as they are listed from CBS 10996. 1-5 for niche tuhrim, 7-5 for shayrum, 12-10 for titor ishar team, 5-9 for kabli tum. Follows the subtitle, in this case, Hamshu perhaps. The next quatrain starts with the last interval ending the previous one. In this case, 5-9, interval kabli tum. In our reconstruction, the first quatrain, A, starts with the descending fifth niche tuhrim. It is complemented with the last member of the quatrain, descending fifth kabli tum. The conjoining of 2 fifths amount to the scale of ishar tum. The next quatrain starts with descending fifth kabli tum. The 2 inner ascending thirds are shayrum and titor ishar team. When they are conjoined, they become the fifth boom, which ends on D, which is the pitch of string hamshu. The second quatrain, B, starts with descending fifth kabli tum. It is complemented with the last member of the quatrain, the descending fifth, E♯tum. The conjoining of the intervals amount to the n-neotonic scale of Kabli-tum. The next quatrain starts with the descending fifth E♯tum. The two inner thirds are T-tor Kabli-tum and Re-bu-tum. Once conjoined, they form the descending fifth P-tum, which ends on G, which is the pitch of string urum. The next quatrains follow the same pattern. The last descending fifth of the last quatrain is also the first descending fifth of the first quatrain. Therefore, this system consisted of a series of 7 n-neotonic scales. From the above observations, we can lay the following rules. The first and fourth descending fifths of a quatrain conjoin into a scale. This scale is also, significantly, the first cited in the first quatrain of the right column of our text. The last descending fifth of a quatrain is taken as the first descending fifth of the quatrain which follows. The two inner ascending thirds amount to a descending fifth, the last pitch of which being the name of the string listed after each quatran. To conclude, we do not see any purpose for this series of quatrains other than they appear to be a form of classification. However, it confirms that descending n-neotonic scales are made of conjoined descending fifths. Descending fifths are made of conjoined ascending thirds. In November 1977, Aaron Schaffer found the fragment of an old Babylonian text dating from around 2000 BCE. It appears to complement UET 7126 and was published in 1981. This fragment brought up a new term, sihrip. Siapum would be a nominal derivative of sahrapum, which mean to throw to the ground. The significance of this verb is that it gives another explanation for scale formation, and as such confirms the validity of the theory in previous texts discussed in these lectures. N4782 is certainly a fragment which would be the continuation of UET 7126. It comes from a copy of the same text. It would be a second chapter, as after having listed the 9 string or pitches of the system ending by saying 9 strings, the text continues at line 11 with the Sumerian sa, du, a, which is Akkadian pismu. Would it be a header? But what is the meaning of pismu? The Chicago Assyrian Dictionary is inconclusive, as it says nothing more than we already know. An enlightened guess, on the basis of our interpretation of lines 12 to 25, is that pismu would be the term for the descending fifth, and that with regard sihrip, as we have said earlier, siapum would be a nominal derivative of sahrapum, meaning to throw to the ground. However, for reasons which will become obvious during the process of our explanations, we would translate the verb sahrapum not as to throw to the ground, but to send back to the beginning, the designated fifth at the beginning of the next scale. As explained before, an n-neotonic scale is made up of 2 conjoined fifths. We propose that lines 12 to 25 give the name of the second fifths of a scale, and secondly that the instruction sihrip means to replace it at the beginning of the next scale where it is followed by a second fifth, thus creating a new scale, and so forth. Therefore, these lines explain the formation of n-neotonic scales and confirm that each is made up of 2 conjoined descending fifths. Prior to illustrating the process, let us be reminded of scale structure. Descending fifths niche 2 riem plus kabli-tum make the scale of E♯tum. Kabli-tum plus E♯tum make the scale of kabli-tum. E♯tum plus keet-mum make the scale of niche 2 riem. Keet-mum plus M-bu-bum make the scale of need-kablim. M-bu-bum plus P-tum make the scale of P-tum. P-tum plus need-kablim make the scale of M-bu-bum. Need-kablim plus niche 2 riem make the scale of Keet-mum. And lines 12 to 26 have line 12 E♯tum, line 13 Sir-heap E♯tim, line 14 Keet-mum, line 15 Sir-heap Keet-mim, line 16 M-bu-bum, line 17 Sir-heap M-bu-bum, line 18 P-tum, line 19 Sir-heap P-tim, line 20 need-kablim, line 21 Sir-heap need-kablim, line 22, niche 2 ream, line 23, seer heap niche 2 ream, line 24, kabli tomb, line 25, seer heap kabli team. We shall now explain the process issuing from the instruction of the term seer heap. In the scale of kabli tomb, the fifth Ishar tomb is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Ishar team sends the fifth Ishar tomb to the upper part of scale of niche 2 ream. In the scale of niche 2 ream, Keet Mum is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Keet Mim sends the fifth Keet Mum to the upper part of the scale Need Kablim. In the scale of Need Kablim, the fifth Embu Boom is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Embu Beam sends the fifth Embu Boom to the upper part of scale Pitum. In the scale of Pitum, the fifth Pitum is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Pitum sends the fifth Pitum to the upper part of the scale Embu Boom. In the scale of Embu Boom, the fifth Need Kablim is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Need Kablim sends the fifth Need Kablim to the upper part of the scale Keet Mum. In the scale of Keet Mum, the fifth niche 2 ream is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap niche 2 ream sends the fifth niche 2 ream to the upper part of the scale Ishar Tum. In the scale of Ishar Tum, the fifth Kabli Tum is the lower fifth of the scale. Seer heap Kabli Tum sends the fifth Kabli Tum to the upper part of the scale Kabli Tum. The description suggests a tuning procedure which differs from that which is prescribed in text UET 774, where the tuning process is undertaken by means of the correction of the dissonant interval or Procrustean fifth in the scale, identified as Lazaku, unclear, to consonants, by tensing or relaxing one or two strings of the lyre, thus creating a new scale. The process is continued until the cycle concludes with a scale having the same name as the first scale mentioned, Ishar Tum, however, a semitone higher as a consequence of the process used. In 1996, Henry Lemay published text KAR 158 catalogued under reference VAT 10101. Wolfram von Soden collated it, and it was further published by contributors to the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary. Ebeling labeled it as a hymnen catalogue. The text measures 18 by 20 by 0.5 centimeters. It is hosted in Berlin. It was found at a shore. Essentially, this text enumerates a long collection of hymns and their incipits, 6, 11, 16, 21 and 26 hymns in Akkadian style, 32 hymns the nature of which not given, 5 hymns in the Ishtar style where an Urgulu unknown instrument is mentioned, 10 hymns in the Ishtar style, 15 hymns in the Ishtar style, 25 hymns in the Ishtar style. Follows 32 hymns of the series My Shepherd in the Ishtaru 2 style, which might have been played in the scale of Ishar 2. Another list of incipits follows without any style mentioned. The list continues with 5 Sumerian Teglu hymns, 10 Sumerian Tegu hymns, 15 Sumerian hymns, 23 Tegu hymns, 5 Ardab Sumerian hymns, all with incipits. At column 5 there is another list of incipits, which concludes with 13 songs in the modus of the Akkadian flute. At lines 16 and 17. The translation ignores that the Akkadian Ebbubi does not refer to a flute of the same name, but to the scale in which the song was composed, the scale of Embubu, or the descending Enni tonic scale descending from D. More hymns follow with names of unknown styles, including marching, dancing, and temple hymns. At column 7, line 24, the translation, altogether 17 Irtu Song of the Lyre is incorrect, as Iratu Shaki Igmi should translate a 17-breast song in the scale of Keet Mu, which is descending Enni tonic scale from G. More incipits follow mainly of a sexual nature. At column 8, line 14, again the translation is wrong, it should be 3 songs in the N neotonic descending mode of D. Same column, line 15. The translation should be 2 songs in the N neotonic descending scale of A. Column 8, line 20 mentions 11 Akkadian hymns of ululation. This should be translated as melismatic hymns. More hymns follow of various nature, interestingly at column 8. Line 36 mentioning 1 Cimmerian hymn with antiphon, suggesting that responsorial music would have been practiced. There is also mention of rude hymns. The tablet concludes with incorrect translations at column 8 at lines 45 to 52, which say, for line 45, 23 hymns in the Akkadian Escher two-tone scale, while it should be 23 hymns in the Akkadian Isha to N neotonic descending scale of C. 46. 17 hymns in the lyre tone scale should read 17 hymns in the N neotonic descending scale of G. Keep Moom, line 47. 24 hymns in the flute tone scale should read 24 hymns in the descending N neotonic M boo boom scale of D, line 48. 4 hymns in the harp tone scale should read 4 hymns in the descending N neotonic scale of A P-tum, line 49. Hymns in the descending tone scale should read hymns in the descending N neotonic scale of E, need kablim, line 50. Hymns in the ascending tone scale should read hymns in the descending N neotonic scale of B, niche turiem, line 51. Hymns in the middle tone scale should read hymns in the descending N neotonic scale of F, kabli tum. The rest of the tablet has broken away. It will be noted that the hymns mentioned in this impressive catalogue are played in the N neotonic descending scales of C, G, D, A, E, B, and F. This order of scales corresponds to the order in which they are in the second part of the text UET 774. This shows that they started from a higher transposition to reach the natural descending N neotonic scale of C. This order is in support of the theory in texts mentioned in these lectures and would also confirm that theoretical systems were used in the practice of the natural tonal ordering of the pieces, and that Babylonians understood the emotional values of their scale system. These old Babylonian fragments N3355, N7745, N7679, UM29, 15357 and N3020 come from Nippur. They introduced 2 new terms, Zenum and Genum, both associated with previously discussed term Sihreep, and with names of strings, names of intervals of descending fifths and ascending fourths, and names of descending N neotonic scales. As such, they are related to the description on the left column of UET 774 and with text N4782. I will not display the complete transliteration of these texts, but only select parts which can be analyzed in function of our interpretation of other texts of the same period. The analysis of these texts depends on the interpretation of the following arguments. Firstly, that there are 7 descending melodic intervals of the fifth, namely 1. Nish Tuhrim C B A G F 2. Isha Tum B A G F E 3. Mbubum A G F E D 4. Need Kablim G F E D C 5. Kablitum F E D C B 6. Kitmum E D C B A 7. Pitum D C B A G. And there are 7 ascending thirds. 1. Sholshatum C D E 2. Sheru D E F 3. Seadu E F G 4. Titor Ishatum F G E 5. Titor Kablitum G A B 6. Iskum A B C 7. Rebutum B C D. 2/3 conjoin into a fifth, and 2/5 conjoin into an N near tonic scale. There are 7 such scales. 1. E sharp tum, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B. 2. Niche tu rem, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. 3. P tum, A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G. 4. Keet moon, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F. 5. Kabli tum, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E. 6. Need kablim, E, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D. 7. Embu boom, D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. I have interpreted the term C-reap as the selection of the last fifth of scale X and bringing it at the beginning of another, scale Y. For instance, in the scale of P-tum, which is A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, the last fifth is D, C, B, A, G. It is also called P-tum. This interval of the fifth is placed as the first fifth of the next scale, D, C, B, A, G plus G, F, E, D, C, which is the scale of Mbubum, and so forth. Therefore, I will assume that in the collation of the present texts, whenever C-reap X is mentioned, it is to be taken as the interval X, and not as the scale of the same name. Furthermore, this might enlighten the purpose of the 2 terms, object of the present lecture, Zenum and Genum, but which would be the interval and which would be the scale is yet to be elucidated. It is contended that the locution C-heap plus X in the genitive would be followed by X in the nominative plus Zenum, as in the following instances. First, in text N3354, reverse, line 2, C-heap kabli team, line 3, kabli tum zenum. Second, in the collation of the N fragments 3354, 3355, 7745 and 7679, obverse, line 9, C-heap P team, line 10, possibly Mbubum zenum. Third, reverse, column 3, line 8, C-heap kabli team, line 9, kabli tum zenum. Fourth, in UM29, 15357, obverse, line 3, C-heap need kablim, line 4, probably kitmum zenum. Fifth, column 2, line 1, probably C-heap Mbubim. Line 2 would be need kablim zenum. 6. Line 10. C-heap keep meme. Line 11. Possibly need kablim genum. 7. With N3354 and 3355, column 2, line 9. C-heap P team, line 10. Possibly Mbubum zenum. 8. Reverse, column 1. C-heap kabli team, line 2. Kabli tum zenum. It must be reminded that in Akkadian, intervals of descending fifths and descending N near-tonic scales share the same names. However, in text CBS1 0996, it appears that the sumerogram Sa precedes intervals. Thus, we could hypothesize that Sa might be the Sumerian for either Akkadian Zenum or Genum, and that scales would be either. In the present texts, locutions mostly consisting in terms for a scale or for an interval, followed by Zenum, happen in 17 occurrences. When followed by Genum, the pairings happen in 15 instances. Therefore, we may agree that there are as many terms followed by Zenum as they are followed by Genum. Scales and intervals followed by both zenum and genum happen in about 15 instances. Therefore, we may conclude, and taken in consideration erasures in the texts, that the terms zenum, genum, and conjunct zenum and genum happen in equal numbers, while scales and intervals of descending fifths are mentioned in assumed equal instances. Intervals of ascending thirds are rarely mentioned 4 or 5 times. However, the many erasures may corrupt these figures. It is noteworthy that the names of the strings, as they are known from the generative and neotonic scale of Petum, meaning opening, that is A, G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, are occasionally followed by genum and or zenum. Rebia uhrim, abanum genum and zenum. Rebia uhrim zenum, hamzu genum. Rebia uhrim zenum, uhrum genum. I do not understand why both zenum and genum can apply to a string, unless the pitch of the string is taken to indicate scales descending from the pitch to which they equate. However, the line that follows the name of the string has an interval of the fifth placed at the bottom of the scale to which one pitch is added. For example, for Rebia uhrim, followed by Kitmum zenum, the scale is C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C, B. The interval Kitmum is E, D, C, B, A. The last A is added to the scale, making it decatonic. The same principle is used for the string uhrum, which at the next line, the interval Ishar tum. The scale from uhrum is G, F, E, D, C, B, A, G, F. The interval Ishar tum is B, A, G, F, E. The scale requires an added E and forms a decatonic scale. With pitch hramshu, the interval following at the next line is Ishar tum. The scale descending from hramshu is D, C, B, A, G, F, E, D, C. Interval Ishar tum is F, E, D, C, B. It requires an added B and forms a decatonic scale. Would this be a method for the formation of decatonic scales remains to be explored. Interestingly, the position of seer heap intervals, scales, intervals of fifths and thirds, concurrently to the names of the strings, can alone give meaning to the theory behind these very fragmented texts without need for the understanding of terms zenum and genum. However, genum suggests that it might be related to Sumerian Gine, later Neo-Babylonian Ginu, meaning infant, child, but also descendant. The link to music is speculative, but I would take it that the later Greek term enos with the same meaning would have been borrowed from the Akkadian. In the Bailey Dictionary of Greek, the word enos, from Proto-European genos, meaning clan, family, from gen, to give birth, and cognate with Sanskritianas, is not related to music, but then we find it with Latin genos and French genre to describe the constitutive elements of an interval. Thus, genum would describe a type of interval, the elements of which preceding or following the sequences of pitches of a given interval. This obscure Neo-Assyrian text, perhaps from Sippar, was rediscovered at the British Museum by Liechti and Lambert, who contributed to its reading together with Oppenheim. Solbiger then granted Kilmer the privilege of studying it. It was subsequently published in 1984. In early 1997, Irving Finkel helped me understand its contents. The tablet is typically divided in 2 distinct parts by a double line. Both parts relate to music. The first part is essentially about the listing of 5 or perhaps 6 ikribu. These are some forms of benedictions or greeting adorations, perhaps to be accompanied by hand gestures and to be recited to statues at a temple. The second part, which is in 3 sections, includes the Sumerian term shu-si, which is Akkadian ubanu, meaning finger. These 2 fingers would correspond to the size of a semitone fret and may relate to the position of specific frets on a lute. The colophon of the first part, line 12 of the reverse, tells us that this tablet contains 5 or 6 ikribu, which are types of prayers. The text links specific gods to specific strings. Line 1 of the obverse starts with Sumerian di ish su, Akkadian kud mu, meaning 4 or first string. Line 2 has Sumerian mi'in, Akkadian sha mi shi, meaning 2 or next string. This is followed by the name of the Sumerian god Enmi Sha Ra. Line 4 has Sumerian Aisha, Akkadian Shalshu, meaning 3, thin string, and mentions a great goddess, creatress of God and man. Line 6 has Sumerian Lam Ma Akkadian, Aba Nu, meaning 4th string, created by the god Ea, and also mentioning gods Shulot and Hranis. Line 8 has Akkadian Hranshu, meaning 5, 5th string, qualifying a function of that string or pitch, stating that it is like the open tuning interval. The equation is simple. We have the number of a string followed by a type of song and the name of a deity to whom the song is devoted. The string number would equate to the top note of the scale which starts on this string, relating to the order of scales that we have in the second chapter of UET 774. There is a parallel with another Neo-Babylonian text in the Yale collection, YBC 11381, which we shall analyze later in these lectures, with 9 lines starting by one of the 9 strings of the Enneatonic system, and where each number is followed by a dedicati god and laudatory incipits to that god. Thus I would speculate that 1 would be the scale of Ishautum, 2 would be Kitmum, 3 would be Mbubum, 4 would be Pitum, and 5 need Koblim. The second part is much more complicated. I have advanced, speculatively, that Shu Si Mesh meant X fingers, in relation to my assumption that 2 Uba Natu amounted to the Babylonian semitone. This leads me to further speculating that this second part of the text explains or prescribes the position of frets or other fingering marks on the neck of a lute. But these lines remain resolutely obscure. It was colleague and friend Dr. Irving Finkel of the British Museum who brought this tablet to my attention when a dealer in antiquities asked him for his opinion. Then Irving asked my advice, as he thought it was a text related to music. I wrote a report about it, but surprisingly the dealer refused that I published it, for some spurious reason. Regardless, I published it in my 1998 book, The Archaeomusicology of the Ancient Near East. It was acquired by the Skoyen collection under number MS5205. The epigraphy, along with the shape of the tablet, and that it had been recycled, suggests that it is Old Babylonian from around 2000 BCE. It is of a poor hand, which further confirms that it is a school text. The student who inscribed it, possibly in haste with some elementary knowledge of the script, might have made erratic substitutions in the header. He would have written Sumerian pa for Akkadian pa, meaning to intone, speaking of the voice of strings, and Sumerian tu, Akkadian erbu, neribu or eribu, meaning to enter, entry or beginning, for Sumerian tu, Akkadian sheep tu, meaning incantation. Thus, the header would have translated as intonation of the incantation, or something to that effect. However, this hypothesis is unsatisfactory. The tablet consists of 28 numbers written on 4 columns and 7 rows. Each cell contains a single number ranging from 1 to 14. There is a pattern in the figures, such as 3, 4 and 4, 5, 9, 10 and 10, 11, and so forth, which suggests some intention, but which, also, that the numbers are from 1 to 14 would suggest that they might represent 2 consecutive heptatonic scales. However, we would need to wait for about 1,500 years for the first evidence of heptatonism. Therefore, without any further indications about the purpose of this text, I shall have to conclude that it is most unlikely to represent any form of music. Some adventurous musicologists have argued that heptatonism was known to Mesopotamians as early as the 3rd millennium BCE on the basis, they argued, that heptatonic diatonism was somehow imprinted, from the onset, ubiquitously and intemporally, in the unconscious of mankind. There are always fame-seeking researchers who will advance the most extraordinary ideas, but, and in respect for academic probity, we must only rely on primary sources and their proofs, and such only appeared with this extraordinary text, dating from around 800 years BCE. It was initially published by Hilprecht, where he thought that this tablet was an astronomical text from the temple library of Nippur. The tablet is divided into 2 sections. The first section, at the top left, consists of a heptagram inscribed within 2 concentric circles with writing on the inner side of the circles. The second section, below the heptagram, is a table with 11 columns, the first of which is empty, with traces of script. Columns 2 and 3 are inscribed with 2 lists of 7 numbers, possibly 8. These columns are essential to the fundamental meaning of the text. A header spreads along the whole length of the columns. Some propositions have been put forward regarding its interpretation, but none up to now is sufficiently intelligible. The nomenclature on the heptagram and the readings of the first 2 columns to the left of the table are clear. The numbers in the columns express an alternation of descending fifths and ascending fourths. Should 1 be pitch C, then 2 and 6 would be B and E, then 6 and 3 would be E and A, 3 and 7 would be A and D, 7 and 4 would be D and G, 4 and 1 would be G and C, 1 and 5 would be C and F, and 5 and 2 would be the diminished fifth F and B. To a musicologist, this pattern suggests immediately a typical method of tuning, still in usage to this day, for the construction of a heptatonic scale by means of descending fifths and ascending fourths. We have chosen to start the pattern with descending fifth B to E, followed by ascending fourth E to A, and so forth. The last pitch would be a natural B. The heptagram associates its vertices with the names of the strings from 1 to 7. It is to be noted that although the number of strings has been reduced to 7 out of 9, the remaining 7 have kept the older nomenclature, that is, front string, next string, third thin string, ear the creator string, fourth rear, and third rear strings. It makes no doubt that while the heptagram was a systemic revolution, it kept, nevertheless, elements of the older system. In this text, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 indicate a fixed descending scale. C, B, A, G, F, E, D in relation to the names of the 7 strings. Their pairing indicate the intervallic procedure to generate a tuning, in this case B to E, E to A to D, D to G, G to C, C to F. Unfortunately, this text is incomplete. However, its readable parts are sufficiently explicit to prove heptatonism, its construction, and the first evidence of cyclical pitch dispersion. Although the columns could be reconstructed, their content does not appear to give anything particular other than natural properties of the heptachord. We could assume that the header simply explained the figures in the columns, in which case its importance would not be of great consequence. This is possibly why the tablet was left unfinished. More importantly is the reason why the heptagram was drawn so carelessly. While it is agreed that a heptagram cannot be drawn exactly with ordinary drawing tools, we must agree that the scribe could have done better. Then an inspired amateur offered a most interesting remark without really understanding its underlying importance. They assumed that the irregularity was intentional because it was the first ever attempt at representing semitonal values graphically. Indeed, a regular heptagon falsely expresses heptatonism since the vertices of the star are equidistant. A closer look at the design explains this hypothesis. To the left, we have the heptagram in its original position in relation to the tablet, and to the right, we have the heptagram rotated counterclockwise by about 40 degrees. Immediately the answer appears. The red lines locate the semitones in the heptatonic representation. There they are placed symmetrically in relation to the vertical point, which in our hypothesis is pitch B, starting the sequence of alternation of descending fifths and ascending fourths, as indicated in the columns. The striations to the left of the top vertex of the left heptagram appears to emphasize the location of C. Additionally to giving instructions for the construction of a heptatonic set, the figure was probably used as a device built from two round plates of metal rotating on top of one another, which located tones and semitones in each of the 7 scales. For example, in the heptatonic scale of Kudmu, the semitones are placed between the first and second strings and the fifth and sixth strings. As soon as Neo-Babylonian scholars estimated the semitone as half a tone, it would have become far easier for them, conceptually, to divide the 360 degrees of the circle into 12 sections of 30 degrees, since the theory approximately divided the octave into 6 tones, or 12 semitones. While Babylonian scholarship might have divided the circle into 12 angles of 30 degrees to quantify semitones, 2 semitones of 60 degrees for tones, and consequently would have invented the equal temperament system, is far-fetched. It would only have existed theoretically, but could not have been applied. However, they would have conceived a very convincing sexagesimal division of the musical spectrum. Among other hypothetical inventions was their calculation of frequency. However, this was only under the form of reciprocals of strings lengths as written on 4 tables for the temple library of Nippur, also excavated by Hilprecht. They might have invented chromaticism, but only as a consequence of the transformation of the dynamic to the thetic, as the unexpected consequence of a system, but not as a concept issuing from an epistemic cognition. In his Theorem 17 of the Sectial Canonis, Euclid, who would have lived around 300 BCE, would have written, "From the Mese B, tune up a fourth to G, and from G tune down the fifth to D. Thus B to D is a tone. From D tense the fourth to E, and from E tune down the fifth to Z. Z to D will thus be a tone and Z to B a ditone. In other terms, from E tune up to A, from A tune down to D, from D tune up to G, and from G tune down to C. Therefore C to D is a tone and C to E is a ditone." CBS 1766 is half a millennium older, and it is very likely that it was the source for Euclid's theorem during the Orientalizing period, when Greek scholars traveled to Babylon for their education in most scientific fields, music being one of them. Text YBC 11381 dates from the late Babylonian period, second half of the first millennium BCE, and came either from Nippur or Uruk. It measures 58 by 89 by 25 millimeters. It was first published by Elizabeth Payne of Yale University. It lists 9 strings. Each string number is followed by an incipit. The 9 strings are obviously those known from text UET 7, 1-6. Unlike their disposition in the aforementioned text, where the 9 strings of the lyre are listed palindromically as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, YBC 11381 has strings listed sequentially as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. The argument in this paper is that the 9 sa, or strings in YBC 11381, in addition to listing strings and pitches, would also have been used for naming 9 anytonic incipits and their scales. String 1. May Oshur, the king of the gods, improve your dominion for you. String 2. May Ishtar, who created mankind, grant you well-being and longevity. String 3. May Darago make you rival the fierce weapons and the raging storm. String 4. Enkidu, treat kindly the lady, the protective spirit who created good things, the Lomasu. String 5. May Damkiana make your appeal, your prayers, and the stroke of your nose always pleasing to the Lord of Lords. String 6. May Endoshirima present your artful advice and your precious words daily. String 7. May Endoakuga always let your footstep fall on prosperous roads and a smooth path. String 8. May Enuhit Tila constantly establish abundance, plenty and prosperity for the pastures of your people. String 9. May Emeshara crush the forces of those who wrong you and your enemies. May he scatter the weapons of your adversaries. Copied according to dictation, excerpted for my well-being, the third string from the end. Our understanding of the music theory in the ancient Near and Middle East rests firstly on our knowledge of languages having used the cuneiform script from the late 4th millennium to the dawn of Christianity, and secondly from ratios encrypted in these ancient texts. Their understanding and their testing in the light of historical parallels and comparative ethnomusicology led to a tangible quantification of their elements and their conceptualizations. However, while ratios give exact figures, these would only have been general guides onto which melismata and other tonal inflections would have added to the basic melody, thus generating regional particularisms. However, these idiosyncrasies are lost forever, with only some parsimonious literary elements only guiding towards some vague impressions of how music would really have sounded. However, the theory, because of its nature, is unfailingly recorded, although, as is often the case, and for the past 50 years, some pseudo-musicologists have bent facts to fit their ideas, rather than having their ideas bent to fit facts. Another important factor which contributed to the authenticity of these texts is that they were written on clay tablets which can survive thousands of years, and that all are contemporaneous with their authors, unlike, for instance, the fragile Greek textual medium of which almost nothing survives, but a small inconsequential papyrus fragment of the 4th century BCE. Furthermore, in some cases, where we have copies written in the 1st millennium, for instance, it is possible to extract from them underlying theories which came sometimes from as far as the late 3rd millennium. This is the case with CBS 10996, which, while written during the 1st millennium, includes a heptachordal system which would have been the adaptation of heptatonism from a tridecatonic hypersystem, conceptualized in the 3rd millennium BCE. Now, let's talk about a few constants in musicology. Take a string and attach it at both ends and stretch it to produce a sound. If you divide the string in 9 equal parts, for instance, and place a bridge at 8/9 of that string and pluck 8/9 of it, you will have played a pitch differing from the 9/9 of the string by a just tone. You have plucked 8/9 of the string, and the ratio is therefore 8/9. This is the ratio of string length. The reciprocal ratio of string length 8/9 is 9/8. This is the ratio of frequency. Therefore, we have established that ratios of string lengths are inversely proportional to ratios of frequencies. To test this particularity, let's say that 8/9 of the string sounds a hypothetical 400 vibrations per second, or hertz. Then if we divide 9 by 8, we have 1.125. Multiplying 400 Hz by 1.125 will give 450 Hz. The ratio of 454 hundredths is 9/8. There is a more convenient system used to quantify pitches more practically. The cent equals 1/100th of a semitone. If you know the frequencies of F1 and F2 of two pitches, the number of cents C measuring the interval F1 to F2 is 204 cents. Thus, the two essential tools for the archaeomusicologist are ratios of string lengths and ratios of frequencies, the latter converted into musical cents. While Herr's measurements produce the absolute height of pitches, cents only give their relative quantification. However, octaves increase exponentially when measured on a linear frequency scale, or hertz. From the 2nd millennium BCE, Babylonian theologians classified their major gods in a hierarchical numerical order. Anu was represented by the number 60, Enlil by 50, Ea by 40, Sin, the moon god, by 30. These numbers applied to a monochord give the following. Anu 60 to Enlil 50 is the ratio of 60 to 50, or 6/5, which equals to 316 cents, the minor third, or C to A, should we arbitrarily agree that 60 equals C. The ratio of 50 to 40 or 5/4, which equals 386 cents, is a major third. The ratio of 40 to 30 or 4/3, which equals 498 cents, is the just fourth, F, C. These God numbers generate further intervals. For instance, the interval of the eighth from 60 to 30, which equals to 1200 cents, or from C to lower C. I have not named the interval of the eighth octave, because that concept was not known in any of the ancient texts. Therefore, while I mention the interval of the eighth, it does not have the function of the octave as an intervallic container, as we know it in Western theory, although octave and interval of the eighth have the same quantity of 1200 cents. The four God numbers produce the series from top C at 1200 cents, A at 884 cents, F at 498 cents, and lower C at 0 cents. Text UET 7.126, which was discussed in a previous lecture, has pitches organized palindromically from an axis of symmetry, which can be interpreted and tested as follows. We have a system descending from an A to which we shall ascribe the value of 1404 cents. The following G will be 1404 cents minus the just tone of 204 cents, which equals to 1200 cents. The next pitch is F, which is at another just tone lower. 1200 cents minus 204 cents equals 996 cents. The next pitch is E, at a semitone lower. 996 cents minus 90 cents equals 906 cents. Follows axis of symmetry D, a tone lower. 906 minus 204 equals the just fifth at 702 cents. The next pitch, C, is lower by a just tone, thus 702 cents minus 204 cents equals 498 cents, the just fourth. Follows B, a semitone lower. 498 cents minus 90 cents equals 408 cents. Follows A, at a just tone lower. 408 cents minus 204 cents equals 204 cents. Follows G, another just tone lower. 204 cents minus 204 cents equals 0 cents. It will be noted that these figures are only the consequence of tuning by means of just fifths and just fourths. Then I remembered a list of numbers published in Hilprecht's book titled Mathematical, Metrological and Chronological Tablets from the Temple Library of Nippur, published in 1906 by the Department of Archaeology, University of Pennsylvania. In this book, the second chapter, Multiplication and Division Tables, attracted my attention, especially with a table which gave a comprehensive list of numbers, all representing quantifications of natural harmonics from 1 to 81. these numbers present particular features. Firstly, the numbers are not consecutive and are often separated from each other by comparatively large intervals. Secondly, besides 3 and 5, no indivisible number or its multiple is multiplied. Thirdly, out of 81 numbers, 51 are omitted, leaving, significantly, 30 numbers. I realized that numbers 36 to 81 were quantifications for the system described in UET 7, 126. To prove this quantification, we shall define the intervals between the Nippur numbers and compare them to the numbers acquired by alternation of fifths and fourths. We note that the intervals produced from these texts are the minor second, 90 cents, the just minor second, 112 cents, the major second, 182 cents, and the major second, 204 cents. When played simultaneously, these differences become obvious. You will have noticed that I have omitted numbers 80 and 50. The ratio of 81 to 80, which is equal to 21 cents, is the syntonic comma. It is there probably to indicate the smallest possible interval in the system, with 50 in its relation of 54 to 50, or 27 to 24, 133 cents. It is the minor second, and while it could be placed in the series, its relation with other pitches excludes it from the series, as 50 to 48 or 25 to 24 is 71 cents. It is the minor chroma, an inconsequential figure. 50 to 45 or 10 to 9 is the major second of 182 cents. It is a recognized interval in the series. However, the ratio of 81 to 50 is the acute minor sixth, alien to the series with 835 cents. The ratio of 50 to 36 or 25 to 18 equals 569 cents. It is the just augmented fourth, another alien interval. Much later, Plato would have quantified his 9 muses with the same numbers known from the Nippur tables as factors of 60 to the power of 4, Calliope 5400, Urania 4800, Polyhymnia 4320, Erotta 4050, Terpsichore 3600, Melpomene 3200, Thalia 3000, Euterpe 2700, and Clio with 2400. These numbers generate intervals in the ratios of 9/8, 10/9, and 16/15. On very rare occasions, the extant organology of Egyptian lutes from the 18th dynasty may allow some metrology when measuring the location of frets in relation to the string length, which is determined by the distance from the bridge to the nut of the instrument. Unfortunately, the archaeology of the ancient Near and Middle East has not yielded such instruments. However, on even rarer occasions, the iconography has allowed for sufficiently accurate figures to build up some comparative metrology. For instance, if the angle of the string plan of a harp is larger than 90 degrees, then it is very likely that the tuning would have been anhemitonic on that instrument. When string plans are less than 90 degrees, then the approportionating of the strings would favor a diatonic setting. There is an orthostat at the Hittite site of a lodger Hayek in Turkey, which represents a musician playing a unique lute. If the distance from the bridge to the nut is of 316 units, then their ratio, 316 to 316, equals 0 cents. The ratio of the full length held to fret B is 316 to 290, which equals 147 cents. L2C is 316 to 260, which equals to 338 cents. L2D is 316 to 240, which equals to 476 cents. L2E is 316 to 212, which equals to 691 cents. L2F is 316 to 188, which equals to 999 cents. L2G is 316 to 160, which is equal to 1178 cents. L2H is 316 to 136, or 1459 cents. Thus, we could conclude that the first fret would be Meshaka's three-quarter tone. The second fret would be the neutral third. The third fret would be the just fourth. The fourth fret would be the just fifth. The fifth fret would be the major sixth. The sixth fret would be the eighth, or octave. The seventh fret would be the just ninth. For sure, we have rounded up the figures, but this was done considering the scale of the reproduced instrument. It remains that this scaling would have been a typical Hittite tuning system from the 14th century BCE. This is my fully playable replica of the instrument, now at the Archaeological Museum of the site. The proof of the pudding is in the eating, and this is precisely what this exercise in hypothetical metrology is about. The application of these numbers to a prescriptive text of the same period, UET 774, about the construction of 7 linear tonic scales is conclusive. There is indeed a correlation between metrology and scalar theory. Therefore, the scales resulting from these texts are what Mesopotamians intended, and the sounds we hear from them are what Mesopotamians would have heard at least 4,000 years ago. These scales travelled through time and became the source for the 8 ecclesiastical modes of early Christianity which therefore, and as was thought before, did not come from Greece, but from the Near East. However, and as a conclusion to metrology, we must remember that this is only music theory, and the nature of the practice is an unknown dimension. Music is created by musicians and theory is only its blurred interpretation. This tablet, known as H6, has been collated from 3 fragments, fragments 13.30, 15.49, and 17.387. It was part of an assemblage of about 29 tablets, too fragmented to allow for their collation. They were excavated by French archaeologist Claude Schiffer in the 1950s at the site of Ras Shamra, where stood the ancient city of Ugarit. The discovery of these hurrian cuneiform texts constitute the proof of the evidence. The evidence being the interpretation of the theory, and the proof of the evidence being the infallibility, for the theory to provide text H6 with a musically constructed melody, without which the theory would remain presumptively flawed. Firstly, should the theory deciphered by various scholars be correct, then the melody extracted from this text would be musical. By this I mean that it must have some structure, and that it should lend itself to musical analysis with regard the regularity of its phrases, their introduction and their conclusion, among other elements which distinguish a melody from a series of pitches which could have come from any combination of numbers. Secondly, several scholars have used middle of the first millennium theory for their interpretation of a middle of the second millennium music text. Should it not be posterioristic to elucidate a text composed 1,000 years before the theory used for its interpretation? And thirdly, we have the most extraordinary blunder in the history of music, as some scholars insisted that they notated their intervals as dyads, that is, intervals where both pitches are played simultaneously, to the exclusion of any other form. Would it be logically acceptable that the playing of intervals as consecutive, or as stepwise melodic, was prohibited, and where did these theoreticians find texts which banned the practice? Or is this not simply the reflect of unacceptable dogmatic arrogance from the part of these theoreticians? It remains that this aberration led them to the horns of dilemma when faced with the hurrian texts. The application of their theory of dyads made the song impossible, as the human voice can sing only one pitch at a time, one would reasonably agree. However, they found a solution whereby they claimed that there was an instrumental accompaniment to the song, thus consolidating their dyadic theory. But the colophon of the text is clear. It mentions that it was a song, but it did not suggest any form of instrumental accompaniment. Then they suggested that the term zamaru, which, according to the Chicago Assyrian Dictionary, is defined as a song to be sung with or without accompaniment, but it does not say exclusively that it should be sung with a musical accompaniment. However, it would seem logical that when an instrumental accompaniment was required, it should mention which instrument, otherwise, which would it be? A drum, a trumpet, a harp, a lute? The text does not say. Therefore, the spurious decree that there was an accompaniment was only there in support of the absurdity of their flawed dyadic theory, as a device making their interpretation credible. My interpretation of this song relies on second millennium music theory, whereby only intervals of descending stepwise melodic fifths and ascending stepwise thirds were used. Most of other interpretations have based their interpretation of the intervals as they appear during the middle of the first millennium. Of course, this would not be consequential should the intervals be dyadic, as an inversed fifth is a fourth, and that they have the same pitches, but I would kindly remind my colleagues that a melody is made of melodic elements and not of dyads. We shall now analyze Dr. Duchesne Gilman's interpretation. As we see, there is no structural cohesion in this interpretation. It is difficult to understand what led this otherwise renowned scholar of ancient Greek music to this incomprehensible musical pandemonium. Follows Anne Draffcorn-Kilmer's interpretation. As we see, there is absence of prosody, bars are of uneven lengths, and there is a repetition of catch lines which should not be, but which Kilmer used to give an impression of coherence to her interpretation. Furthermore, the insistence at finding dyads in the place of melodic intervals makes it difficult to differentiate the voice from the instrumental line. I am also astonished that she could find in the hurrian text indications of a tempo which she authoritatively places at 96/8, further qualified as freely. It is always difficult to promote one's competence over the incompetence of others. In my version, it will be noted that line 5 is an introduction, and that line 10 leads back to line 5 to introduce the second set of lyrics. Both lines 5 and 10 could have been ululated on open vowels, as the practice was known from the old Babylonian periods as alali, alalu, and alili in the course of singing, and we find it often written with the determinative din gear meaning God. We find this ululation with the Greek alala, and then with Latin ulu la re. The corpus of the song is set in lines 6, 7, 8, and 9, which are repeated according to the double line with the Winkelhaken. I contend that the music of this song would have been used with other lyrics, and that in an original form, bars would have been of 6/8 throughout the work. The vocalization of this text is still in its early stage. However, both singers having recorded this song are native from the region and found their own inflections intuitively. In the course of the past years, many have borrowed, if not stolen, my interpretation, claiming that they were the original interpreters. However, in plagiarizing my work, they also meticulously copied the errors that I had made in my earliest version. To be fair, most who have used my interpretation have mentioned my work. To conclude, follows a remarkable graphic rendering made in collaboration with the late Emin Beyam and his wife Rosie.
Sham